The dusty road curved like a snake between towering trees as Mara's old car climbed higher into the forested mountains. In the back seat, 10-year-old Luca leaned his head against the window, watching the trees flash by. Each turn revealed breathtaking cliffs and thick green canopies that stretched toward the sky. He had never been so deep in the wilderness before. It felt like another world. Next to him, Ranger, the family's loyal German shepherd, sat tall and silent. The dog's intelligent brown eyes scanned everything, alert, focused. To anyone else, Ranger was just a pet. But to Luca, he was family. Ever since the dog had come into their lives 2 years ago, Ranger had followed Luca everywhere. At home, school, even to the bathroom door, always guarding, always near. Mara looked at her son through the rearview mirror. "We're almost at Uncle Tomas's cabin," she said, her voice warm but slightly strained. "You excited?" Luca shrugged. "I guess." Uncle Tomas was a mystery. Luca only remembered meeting him once, years ago. Mara had explained that Thomas had been living overseas, working odd jobs, and exploring dangerous places. Now he was back, and wanted to spend time with them at the mountain cabin he built years ago. When they finally pulled up to the wooden lodge nestled between tall pines and a steep cliff wall, Tomas was already outside. He waved eagerly and strode toward the car, his hiking boots crunching on the gravel. "There's my favorite nephew," he bellowed. Luca stepped out cautiously. Thomas had a wide grin, a tangle of silver and brown in his beard, and sunglasses that hid his eyes. His handshake was rough and his hug tight, too tight. Ranger growled softly as Thomas patted Luca's shoulder. "What's this guy's problem?" Thomas laughed, nodding at the dog. "He's just protective," Mara replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The cabin looked like something from a postcard. Wood logs, a small porch, and a trail leading into the forest. Inside, it smelled like pine and old leather. The walls were lined with animal heads, fishing gear, and faded photos. Thomas gave them a quick tour, showing off his trophy wall with pride. He spoke loudly, laughed often, but never looked Luca directly in the eyes for long. That evening, they sat around a fire pit behind the cabin. Thomas told wild stories about escaping a panther in the jungle, dodging a sandstorm in the desert, and even sleeping in a tree to avoid wolves. Luca listened wide-eyed, while Ranger lay with his head on Luca's foot, ears twitching. Thomas passed Luca a grilled sausage, but when he leaned too close, Ranger bared his teeth and let out a low growl. "Easy, Mutt," Thomas said, frowning. "Just being friendly," Mara intervened. "He's never aggressive without a reason," she said. "Let's give them time." Later that night, as Luca got ready for bed, he heard his mother and uncle arguing outside. Their voices were low but tense. "You said you just wanted to bond with him," Mara whispered. "I do," Thomas replied, "but you're overprotective. Let the boy experience real life." The next morning, Thomas announced they were going on a hike. "Just the boy and me," he said. "There's a lookout point I want to show him. Great views." Mara hesitated, but agreed on one condition. Ranger had to go too. They set off just after breakfast, climbing narrow trails that twisted along the mountain's edge. Thomas kept up a cheerful tone, pointing out plants and pretending to joke, but Ranger didn't buy it. His ears were back, his body tense. Something wasn't right. When they reached a rocky outcrop with a stunning view of the valley, Thomas placed a hand on Luca's shoulder. "Ever wonder what it's like to fly?" he asked. Before Luca could respond, Thomas shoved the world spun. Luca's scream echoed through the trees. The air seemed to freeze for a moment as Luca tumbled backward, the ground rushing up to meet him in a blur of jagged rocks and tangled branches. His heart hammered in his chest as he fought to breathe, each gasp sharp and desperate. His body slammed against a tree trunk, pain exploding through his side and leg. For a terrifying second, everything went dark. Far above, the sun shone down on the cliff's edge where Thomas stood still, his chest heaving but his face unreadable. He watched as Luca disappeared from sight, swallowed by the forest below. Then, without a backward glance, he turned and strode away, his footsteps crunching on the dry pine needles. But down below, Ranger's sharp bark shattered the silence. The German shepherd stood frozen at the edge of the cliff, teeth bared and eyes blazing. His instincts screamed danger. Luca was hurt, badly. and Thomas had just betrayed the trust of the family. Ranger's ears flattened, his growl deepening into a fierce rumble. Without hesitation, he leapt over the edge. The descent was perilous. The cliffside was steep and jagged, with loose stones and thick brush threatening to trip even the most agile. But Ranger moved with astonishing speed and grace, his paws gripping rock and soil like claws. He darted between branches, barking loudly to wake Luca from unconsciousness. Below, Luca's eyes fluttered open. His breath came in ragged gasps as he tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through his leg and he cried out. His head spun and blood trickled down his temple from a nasty gash. "Ranger," Luca whispered, relief flooding his voice as the dog appeared at his side. Ranger pressed his warm muzzle against Luca's cheek, licking away the blood. He nudged Luca gently, urging him to stay awake. Luca tried to move, but the pain was too much. Panic flickered in his eyes. Suddenly Ranger stood and howled, a long, mournful sound that echoed across the cliffs and through the forest. It was a call for help. Far above, some distant hikers paused, hearing the cry. One pulled out a phone, frowning. "Did you hear that? Sounds like a dog, or someone in trouble." Back on the ledge, Ranger barked again, then turned and scrambled back up the cliff, zigzagging through the trees. Luca watched as the dog disappeared from view, his chest tight with hope and fear. Meanwhile, Thomas was walking briskly down the trail, his face grim. He felt the weight of what he had done pressing down on him. He tried to convince himself it was the only way, that Luca stood between him and a future free from debts and troubles. But guilt gnawed at his insides. As Thomas rounded a bend, Ranger suddenly appeared, barking and growling, blocking his path. Thomas tried to shoo him away, but Ranger wouldn't budge. The dog's loyalty was clear. His duty was to Luca, not. Thomas back at the cabin, Mara grew anxious when Luca and Thomas didn't return by lunchtime. She paced the porch, Ranger at her heels. When the sun climbed higher and still no sign of them appeared, worry turned to panic. Mara grabbed her phone and dialed the local ranger station. "My son is missing," she said, voice trembling. "He went hiking with my brother, but they never came back." Within minutes, a search party assembled and experienced hikers and local volunteers who knew the terrain well. Mara wrapped Ranger's leash tightly around her wrist and joined them. Hours passed. The sun began to dip behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the forest. The searchers followed Ranger's barking and howling, weaving through trees and rocks. The dog never stopped signaling, his determination unwavering. Finally, near a narrow ledge halfway down the cliff, they found Luca, bruised, bleeding, but alive. Tears streamed down Mara's face as she dropped to her knees beside him. Ranger lay down next to Luca, his head resting gently on the boy's chest. Luca smiled weakly, reaching up to stroke the dog's fur. "You saved me," he whispered. At that moment, no one noticed Thomas slipping quietly back to the cabin, his plan unraveling. The rugged cliffside was quiet again, save for the soft murmur of the wind and the distant calls of birds settling in for the evening. Luca lay on the narrow ledge, his breath shallow and uneven. His leg throbbed fiercely, and the sharp sting from the cut on his forehead mingled with the cold seeping into his bones. But his eyes, bright with fear and hope, were fixed on Ranger, the dog who never left his side. As the rescuers worked swiftly to stabilize him, one of the hikers called out, "We need to get him up. It's getting dark fast." Mara's hands shook as she clutched Luca's, tears streaking her cheeks. "Hold on, baby," she whispered. "You're going to be okay." But even as the rescue team prepared their ropes and harnesses, a dark shadow loomed miles away, hidden behind thick pines. Thomas. The man's face was pale, his eyes cold and distant. He had watched everything unfold from afar, convinced that Luca was gone for good. He had underestimated the bond between boy and dog, and the fierce intelligence of Ranger. Back on the ledge, Ranger pressed close to Luca's side, whining softly as the rescuers carefully lifted the boy. The dog's dark eyes never left Luca's face, silently promising protection. Hours earlier, Thomas's smile had twisted into something sinister. Their hike began like any other, the morning sun dappling the forest floor, birds singing in the canopy. Thomas was unusually quiet, watching Luca closely as if calculating each move. Ranger was uneasy from the start, sticking close to Luca, his senses alert. When they reached the rocky outcrop, Thomas had feigned excitement, spreading his arms wide to show the vast valley below. Luca's innocent smile didn't last long. Without warning, Thomas shoved him. The shove was violent and sudden, a betrayal so deep it shattered Luca's trust. The boy's scream was cut short as he plummeted into the abyss, the wind roaring in his ears. Thomas turned his back, convinced he had sealed Luca's fate, but Ranger reacted instantly. The dog's leap over the cliff was no accident. It was pure instinct, fueled by love and loyalty. He knew Luca was in danger, and nothing would stop him from rescuing his friend. Now, as Luca was being carried up the steep trail towards safety, Thomas slipped away from the scene. His heart pounded, but relief didn't come. Instead, a cold dread settled over him. He thought he had won, but somewhere deep inside, Thomas knew this was only the beginning. Later, back at the cabin, Thomas sat alone in the dim light. The silence pressed in around him. His hands trembled as he stared at a crumpled photo of Mara, Luca, and himself. A happy family once. Now it was broken beyond repair. Meanwhile, Mara paced the cabin floor, waiting for news. Ranger sat at her feet, eyes watchful. The dog's loyalty extended beyond Luca. He seemed to understand that danger still lurked nearby. When the rescue team finally returned with Luca, exhaustion and relief flooded the air. Mara hugged her son tightly, sobbing quietly. Luca whispered, thanks to Ranger, who licked his face gently. But the nightmare wasn't over. In the coming days, police would investigate Thomas's actions. Secrets hidden in his past would come to light. Debts, desperation, and a plan to remove Luca from the family to claim an inheritance. Through it all, Ranger remained Luca's protector. The dog's bravery captured the hearts of the local community and beyond, a symbol of hope in the darkest of times. For Luca, every day was a struggle, recovering from injuries, grappling with the betrayal of a man he once trusted. But with Ranger by his side, he found strength to heal. And somewhere far from the mountains, Thomas faced the consequences of his choices. Days passed slowly at the cabin, where the sunlight filtered weakly through rain-streaked windows. Luca lay on the worn sofa, a thick cast encasing his broken leg, his face pale but determined. The forest's vibrant life outside felt like a distant world compared to the stillness inside. Yet his eyes sparkled with a new strength, forged by pain and survival. Mara sat beside him, never leaving his side. Her hands trembled as she carefully cleaned the wound on Luca's forehead, whispering soft reassurances. "You're a fighter, my brave boy," she said. Ranger rested nearby, alert but calm, his amber eyes fixed on Luca. The bond between the boy and his dog had only deepened in the days since the fall. Luca often reached out to stroke Ranger's thick fur, finding comfort in the steady presence. But while Luca and Mara tried to heal, a storm brewed beyond the cabin's walls. The police had arrived swiftly after the rescue, alerted by the hikers who had heard Ranger's desperate howls. Questions followed, sharp, probing, and relentless. Why was Thomas hiking with Luca alone? The lead detective asked Mara one afternoon, his voice clinical but not unkind. Mara swallowed hard. He said he wanted to bond with Luca, to teach him about nature. And Ranger? Mara looked at the German shepherd lying quietly by the fireplace. Ranger wouldn't leave Luca's side. Something felt off about Thomas from the start. The detective nodded thoughtfully, making notes. "We'll be investigating." Thomas's actions are suspicious. Luca's thoughts churned. He remembered the shove, the sudden betrayal, the terror of falling. His trust shattered like glass. Yet beneath the fear was a question burning inside him. Why? Why would someone who was family want to hurt him? Meanwhile, Thomas was nowhere to be found. After the incident, he vanished like a ghost, leaving behind only cold footprints and uneasy silence. Rumors began to spread through the small mountain town. Whispers of debts, desperation, and a man pushed too far. Mara's phone buzzed one evening. It was a message from Thomas's old friends, warning her about his unstable past, failed businesses, angry creditors, and dark moods. A man haunted by shadows. The police dug deeper. They uncovered bank statements, threatening letters, and a plan Thomas had drawn up to remove Luca from Mara's life, to gain control over an inheritance Luca was due to receive. The truth was heavier than Mara expected, but it explained everything. Throughout the investigation, Ranger was more than a pet. He was a witness, protector, and symbol of loyalty. Officers often praised the dog's courage. One detective remarked, "That dog saved that boy's life. Without him, we'd be talking about a tragedy." The local community rallied around Mara and Luca. Neighbors brought meals, offered rides to doctors, and shared stories of Ranger's heroism on social media. Luca's story touched hearts far beyond the mountains, a tale of survival, trust, and a dog's unwavering devotion. At night, Mara held Luca close, comforting him as nightmares haunted his sleep. She vowed to shield him from harm and to never let Thomas darken their lives again. Slowly, Luca began physical therapy. Ranger was always by his side, ready with a gentle nudge or a lick when pain became too much. One afternoon, as sunlight broke through the clouds, Mara sat on the porch, Ranger resting his head on her lap. Luca played nearby, laughing for the first time in weeks. Though the scars would remain, both visible and hidden, there was hope. The cliff had tried to take Luca, but it hadn't broken him, and Ranger's next move, the leap into the unknown to save his boy, became a legend whispered among the trees. The mountain air was crisp and clear as the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow across the valley. Luca sat on the porch of the cabin, a thick blanket wrapped around his shoulders, his legs still stiff but healing. He watched Ranger trot around the yard, tail wagging with the simple joy of freedom and purpose. The German Shepherd was no longer just a pet or companion. He had become a hero, a guardian whose loyalty transcended everything. But what no one outside the family truly understood was just how deep and instinctive Ranger's connection to Luca really was. It all began the moment Thomas pushed Luca over the cliff. As the boy fell, Ranger stood frozen, a primal surge of protective instinct flooding through him. There was no hesitation, no fear. Ranger knew he had to act, and fast. Leaping from the cliff's edge was no small feat. The terrain was treacherous, sharp rocks and loose soil awaited below, any one of them capable of ending Ranger's life. Yet, driven by something only the purest loyalty can ignite, Ranger descended with astonishing speed and agility. Every bark he let out was a beacon of hope, echoing through the silent forest. His cries woke Luca, who was barely conscious and in pain. Ranger's muzzle nudged Luca gently, urging him to stay awake and fight. The dog's presence was a lifeline, a promise that help was coming. When Luca finally opened his eyes and saw Ranger's determined gaze, he felt a flicker of strength. The pain in his body was still immense, but the dog's warmth and courage steadied his spirit. But Ranger's work was far from over. Knowing Luca couldn't climb out alone, Ranger scrambled back up the cliff, weaving through dense underbrush and jagged rocks with the urgency of a searchlight. His howls were desperate calls, echoing off the mountain walls. Nearby hikers heard the cries and followed them, leading to the rescue that saved Luca's life. What amazed everyone was how Ranger refused to leave the ledge, standing vigil by Luca's side through the long wait. Even as exhaustion weighed on the rescue team, Ranger's unwavering presence brought comfort to Luca and hope to the rescuers. In the days that followed, Ranger's actions became the centerpiece of the story that spread through the town. The local news interviewed Mara, who tearfully recounted the incredible bravery of her dog. "Ranger saved my son," she said simply. "He knew when Luca was in danger, and he never gave up." The community rallied around the family. Volunteers helped with Luca's physical therapy and chores around the cabin, but it was Ranger who stole the hearts of everyone. Children brought treats for him, and neighbors took turns walking him when Mara was busy caring for Luca. Yet, despite the support, Mara could see the worry lingering in Luca's eyes. The betrayal by Thomas had left a wound deeper than any broken bone. It was a scar on his trust, on his sense of safety. Ranger seemed to understand this too. He became more than a protector. He was a silent comforter, sensing when Luca needed extra love or calm. One evening, as Luca lay resting, Ranger curled up beside him, resting his massive head on Luca's chest. Luca reached out a weak hand, running his fingers through the dog's fur. "Thank you, Ranger," Luca whispered. The German Shepherd responded with a soft whine, a sound full of warmth and promise. The bond between boy and dog had never been stronger. Meanwhile, the investigation into Thomas's actions moved forward. Police uncovered evidence of a plan fueled by greed and desperation, but it was Ranger's courage that had ensured Luca survived to see justice. For Mara and Luca, the road ahead would be challenging. There were physical hurdles, emotional scars, and the long shadow of betrayal. But with Ranger by their side, they felt ready to face whatever came next. And in the quiet moments, when the stars glittered above the mountain, Luca knew he had a guardian angel, one with fur, paws, and a heart as big as the sky. The mountain town that once felt safe now buzzed with uneasy whispers. Tomas's name had become a dark shadow hanging over Mara and Luca's lives. Police had issued a warrant, but the man remained elusive, slipping through cracks in the forest and townspeople's eyes. At the cabin, life was slowly returning to a fragile normal. Luca's leg was healing, and therapy sessions left him tired, but hopeful. Mara did her best to shield him from the heavy cloud of fear that Thomas had left behind, yet every creak in the night, every unfamiliar sound in the woods, made her heart race. Ranger, ever watchful, seemed to share their unease. His ears twitched constantly, eyes scanning the perimeter as if sensing danger lurking just beyond the trees. One evening, as the sky burned pink and orange, Mara sat on the porch, clutching a steaming cup of tea. Luca lay inside, resting, while Ranger patrolled the yard like a sentinel. Mara's thoughts drifted back to Thomas, the man she once called brother, now a stranger consumed by darkness. She remembered the cracks she had ignored, his late-night phone calls, hushed arguments, sudden disappearances. Thomas's debts had piled up, but his desperation had spiraled into something far worse. A soft growl from Ranger broke her reverie. She looked up to see him stiffen, gaze fixed on the thick woods beyond the cabin. His hackles rose. Mara's pulse quickened. Something was out there. Suddenly a branch snapped. Mara stood, heart pounding. "Luca," she called softly. No response. Ranger barked sharply and darted toward the edge of the forest, disappearing between the trees. Mara ran after, him breath-catching as she tripped over roots and stones. Through the underbrush, she glimpsed a figure, shadowed, crouched low, watching. Her blood ran cold. It was Thomas. He stepped forward, eyes wild but desperate. "Mara," he said, voice trembling. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I wanted to fix everything." Mara's hands clenched fists. "You tried to kill my son." Thomas's shoulders sagged. "I was desperate. I thought if Luca was gone I could start over, but seeing him alive and Ranger... I don't know what I was thinking." Before Mara could respond, Ranger appeared, growling low and fierce. Thomas froze, his gaze flicking to the dog. The standoff lasted seconds but felt like hours. Then Thomas did something unexpected. He dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'll turn myself in. I want to make this right." Mara watched, conflicted. Part of her wanted justice, the other perhaps some redemption. She nodded slowly. "Come with me." Together they walked back to the cabin, Ranger trailing close. The next day Thomas surrendered to the authorities. The news spread quickly, and relief mingled with sorrow in the community. Thomas would face consequences, but there was hope for healing. Luca, now stronger, met his uncle once more, this time in the presence of police and counselors. The meeting was tense, filled with unspoken pain and fragile hope. Through it all, Ranger remained Luca's steadfast protector, a reminder that even in darkness, loyalty and love could shine brightest. Mara knew the road ahead would be long, but, with her son safe and Thomas accountable, a new chapter was beginning. One marked by resilience, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bond between a boy and his dog. The first snowfall dusted the mountain cabin in a soft white blanket, turning the world outside into a quiet wonderland. Inside, warmth radiated from the fireplace, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Luca sat wrapped in a thick blanket, his leg propped on pillows. He watched Ranger, who lay stretched out on the rug, eyes half closed but alert. The past weeks had been a whirlwind, the rescue, the legal battles, and Thomas's surrender. Life was far from perfect, but it was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild. What had been broken? Physical therapy was grueling. Luca winced as he pushed through the pain, determined to walk again without limping. Mara never missed a session, her voice steady and encouraging. "You're doing amazing, Luca," she said one afternoon, her eyes glistening with pride. "Step by step, you're getting stronger." Ranger sat nearby, his head tilting as if he understood every word. But healing wasn't just about bones and muscles. It was about trust, something Luca struggled to reclaim. Thomas's betrayal had shaken him deeply. How could someone so close turn so cold? One evening, Mara found Luca sitting by the window, staring out at the moonlit forest. "Thinking about him?" she asked gently. Luca nodded, his voice soft. "I miss the uncle I thought I had, the one who used to play with me and tell stories." Mara reached over, squeezing his hand. "I know, sweetheart, but sometimes people change. It's okay to be angry and sad." Ranger padded over and rested his head on Luca's knee. Luca smiled faintly, stroking the dog's fur. The bond between boy and dog was a constant, a source of strength when the world felt uncertain. As days grew colder, the community's support continued to lift Mara and Luca. Neighbors brought over hot meals and blankets, school friends sent cards, and local news featured Ranger's heroic rescue. One afternoon, the school counselor invited Luca to speak about his experience. Nervous at first, Luca found his voice, sharing how Ranger's bravery saved his life. "Sometimes the best friends don't speak," he said quietly. "They just show up when you need them the most." His words touched many, inspiring others to appreciate the quiet heroes in their own lives. Meanwhile, Mara began volunteering at the local animal shelter, inspired by Ranger's courage. She helped care for abandoned and injured dogs, sharing Luca's story to raise awareness about animal loyalty and protection. Thomas's trial loomed ahead, a difficult chapter filled with tough questions and painful memories. Mara and Luca prepared to face it together, knowing it was part of their healing. Through it all, Ranger remained by their side, a guardian, friend, and symbol of hope. One snowy evening, as Mara tucked Luca into bed, the boy smiled for the first time in a long while. "Ranger's the best uncle I could ever have," he said, his eyes shining. Mara laughed softly. "He's definitely one of a kind." Outside, the stars twinkled above the quiet mountain, a reminder that even after the darkest storms, light always finds a way to shine. Winter deepened over the mountain town, wrapping the world in silence and frost. The trial of Thomas had arrived, a solemn chapter that promised closure but stirred old wounds. Mara sat beside Luca in the courtroom, his small hand clutching hers tightly. Ranger rested quietly at their feet, eyes alert and steady. The room was filled with the weight of waiting, anticipation, and memories. When Thomas entered, his eyes met Mara's briefly, regret and sorrow flickering behind a hardened mask. The man who had once been family now stood as the accused, a man whose choices had nearly shattered a boy's life. The trial was long and arduous. Witnesses spoke of Thomas's troubled past, his debts, and the dangerous desperation that led him to push Luca from the cliff. The evidence was clear, painting a picture of a man lost to darkness. But amidst the facts and judgment, something unexpected unfolded. During his testimony, Thomas broke down, confessing everything, not just the act but the regret that haunted him. He admitted how the weight of his failures had driven him to a moment of madness. "I never meant to lose him," Thomas said, voice cracking. "I wanted to protect my family, but I was blinded by fear and anger." Mara listened, heart torn between pain and a fragile thread of understanding. The judge pronounced the verdict. Thomas was found guilty of attempted murder and sentenced to prison. Justice had been served, but the story was far from over. After the trial, Mara and Luca returned home, exhausted but relieved. The ordeal had tested their strength, but their bond remained unbroken. Luca's recovery continued, each day bringing new milestones. Ranger stayed close, his quiet presence a source of comfort and courage. One crisp morning, Mara took Luca and Ranger for a walk through the snow-covered forest. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches heavy with white. "Do you think we're really safe now?" Luca asked, his voice small. Mara smiled gently. "I think we're stronger than ever and we have each other." Ranger barked softly as if in agreement. In the weeks that followed, Mara and Luca focused on rebuilding their lives, finding joy in small moments, laughter in simple pleasures, and hope in new beginnings. Luca returned to school, greeted by warm smiles and eager friends. He shared his story not with fear but with courage, a reminder that even the darkest moments can be overcome. Mara continued her work at the animal shelter, inspired by Ranger's heroism and the healing power of love. Though Thomas's betrayal had left scars, it had also revealed something greater, the strength of family, the power of forgiveness, and the unbreakable bond between a boy and his dog. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Luca sat beside Ranger on the porch, his leg fully healed and his spirit renewed. "Thank you for never giving up on me," Luca whispered, resting his head against the dog's warm fur. Ranger's eyes shone with quiet pride, the silent promise of a protector fulfilled. The cliff had tested them all, but love, loyalty, and hope had carried them through. And as stars began to twinkle above the peaceful valley, Luca knew that no matter what the future held, he would never face it alone.